In the quiet suburban town Ofit started with whispers in the night. 10-year-old Layla, a bright and imaginative girl, told her dad about a strange man who would visit her every evening. At first, her father, Marcus, brushed it off as a vivid dream or her creative mind playing tricks. After all, kids have wild imaginations, don't they? But as the days turned into weeks, Layla's story never wavered. She described the man with such eerie detail, his voice, his shadow, even the faint scent of smoke that lingered after you left. Marcus began to worry. Was his daughter making this up, or was something more sinister happening? He set out to prove to her that it was just her mind creating these encounters. But the more he observed, the more unsettling things became. Doors creaked open when no one was near. Layla's room felt colder than the rest of the house, and her once sunny demeanor began to fade. One night, determined to get to the bottom of it, Marcus decided to stay awake. What he discovered left him frozen in fear. His heart raced as he realized Layla's tales weren't just childhood fantasies. This was real. Without hesitation, Marcus grabbed his phone and dialed 911. What could possibly be haunting this family? Stick around because the truth will leave you speechless. The night Marcus called 911 was supposed to bring clarity, but it only deepened the mystery. As he spoke with the dispatcher, he struggled to explain what he'd seen, or more accurately, what he couldn't explain. It wasn't just the strange noises or the chilling draft that seemed to swirl in Layla's room. It was the way her bed creaked, as though someone invisible sat at the edge, and the faint sound of murmured words Marcus couldn't make out, but Layla clearly could. She'd been sitting upright, staring at the empty space beside her, whispering back like she was answering a friend. Marcus had always been protective of his daughter, especially after losing his wife a few years earlier. They'd moved to this quiet house in the suburbs, hoping for a fresh start, away from the chaos of the city. It was supposed to be a safe space for both of them, a place to heal. But now he couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was invading their home. The police arrived quickly, but their search of the house turned up nothing unusual. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, no lingering presence. One officer suggested it might be Layla's grief manifesting in strange ways. Another hinted that perhaps Marcus was overly stressed and imagining things. But Marcus knew better. He could feel it. Something wasn't right. And that was only the beginning of the nightmare. After the police left, Marcus felt more alone than ever. He couldn't shake the image of Layla's terrified eyes, darting to the corner of her room where she claimed the man always stood. That night, he didn't leave her side. He stayed in her room, sitting in a chair by her bed, clutching a flashlight in his phone, ready for anything. But as the hours dragged on, the silence of the house was almost too much to bear. Every creak of the floorboards or rustle of wind outside made his nerves jump. Meanwhile, Layla seemed calmer, almost as if having her father there gave her a shield against the fear she couldn't explain. She told Marcus more about the man. "He's not scary, Daddy," she said softly. "He's sad. He talks about his little girl, too." Marcus froze at her words. What little girl? What kind of man would visit his daughter, speaking of such things? The story was becoming darker and harder to dismiss. Marcus decided to dig deeper. He started by researching the house, wondering if its past could hold any answers. What he found left him uneasy. Years ago, a man had lived there, a father who lost his daughter in a tragic accident. The grief had consumed him, leading to his own untimely death under mysterious circumstances. The pieces were falling into place, but they weren't comforting. If this man's spirit was still in the house, what did he want with Layla? And why now? Marcus's mind raced as he pieced together the chilling history of their home. It couldn't be a coincidence. The man Layla described, the sadness in his voice, the way he spoke of a little girl, matched everything Marcus had read. But what was he supposed to do? He couldn't fight something he couldn't see, and the thought of his daughter being drawn into this was unbearable. That night, he decided to set up a camera in Layla's room, determined to catch whatever was happening. He didn't tell her, not wanting to scare her more, but as he tucked her in, he noticed how calm she seemed, almost resigned to the nightly visits. "He says he's sorry," she whispered before falling asleep. Marcus didn't know what to say. Sorry for what? As the hours passed, Marcus watched the footage from the living room, unable to look away. At first, nothing happened. Layla lay still, breathing softly, while the room remained undisturbed. But just after midnight, the temperature on the camera's display began to drop. Slowly, the air in her room grew misty, and then Marcus saw it, something faint but unmistakable. A shadow moved toward her bed, growing clearer with each step. His heart pounded as Layla sat up, as though she'd been waiting for him. She tilted her head, listening to words the camera couldn't capture. Then suddenly, she turned to face the camera directly, her eyes wide with fear. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He says you're next." Marcus's breath caught in his throat. "He says you're next." Layla's words echoed in his mind, chilling him to the core. He bolted to her room, heart pounding, and found her sitting upright, clutching her blanket. Her wide eyes darted to the corner of the room, and Marcus turned to see nothing but empty space. Yet the air felt heavier, thicker, as if something unseen lingered. He grabbed Layla and carried her to his room, determined not to let her spend another second in there. "We're leaving," he muttered, though he wasn't sure where they'd go. But as he reached the front door, he stopped cold. It wouldn't budge. The lock turned easily, but something unseen seemed to hold it shut. He tried every window, every exit, but it was as if the house itself wouldn't let them leave. Desperation took over, and Marcus grabbed his phone to call for help. But the screen flickered, then went black. No signal. That's when he heard it, a faint, sorrowful voice calling his name. It was coming from Layla's room. She clung to his arm, shaking her head. "Don't go, Daddy. He's mad now." Against every instinct, Marcus stepped toward the room, knowing he had no choice. When he entered, the air felt like ice, and the faint shadow he'd seen on the camera was now clearer, sharper, and unmistakably human. But as Marcus braced himself, something changed. The shadow split. There wasn't just one figure. There were two, and one of them wasn't a man. It was a little girl. Marcus froze, staring at the two figures in the dimly lit room. The man's shadow loomed larger, his sorrowful presence filling the air with an almost unbearable weight. Beside him stood the faint outline of a little girl, her form delicate and flickering like a candle about to go out. Marcus's chest tightened as the pieces clicked into place. This wasn't just a haunting. This was a father and daughter, bound by tragedy, trapped in the same cycle of grief that had consumed them in life. The man turned toward Marcus, his voice low and desperate. "Help me," he pleaded, the words barely audible, but cutting through the silence like a knife. Marcus didn't know how to respond. What did he want? How could he help a spirit find peace? Suddenly, Layla stepped forward, breaking free from Marcus's protective grasp. "Don't leave her alone," she said softly, her voice trembling but steady. The little girl's shadow turned toward Layla, her small hand reaching out. In that moment, Marcus realized what was happening. The man wasn't haunting them out of malice. He was protecting his daughter, searching for someone who could understand their pain. "Please," the man whispered again, his figure starting to fade. Marcus knelt beside Layla, his voice firm but gentle. "It's okay. You can let go now. She's safe." The room filled with an eerie silence as the two figures began to dissolve into the air. But just before they disappeared completely, the little girl turned and smiled at Layla. The warmth of that smile lingered, even after they were gone. Relief washed over Marcus as the house seemed to exhale, the oppressive energy lifting. He thought it was over until later that night, when he found Layla's drawing on the table. It was of the little girl, smiling. But in the corner, faintly sketched, was the shadow of another figure. A new one. Marcus stared at the drawing on the table, the unease creeping back. Layla had drawn the little girl with a big smile, but the shadow in the corner was unmistakable. The new figure wasn't as clear, but it was there, lingering. It made Marcus's stomach churn. Had the spirit of the little girl really left, or was there something darker still tied to their home? He sat beside Layla, gently asking her about the drawing. She seemed calm, almost unaware of the unease it caused him. "She's still happy now, Daddy," she said softly. She found her dad, but he's sad too. Marcus took a deep breath, his heart heavy. He thought he understood what had happened, that the spirits had found peace, and the house would finally be free of the sorrow that had held it captive. But Layla's words reminded him that grief was not something that could easily be erased, not even by the end of a haunting. The house, once so cold and oppressive, now felt quiet. Still, Marcus knew something remained. The past wasn't something you could escape, especially when the pain of loss was so powerful. He had done what he could to protect his daughter, but the shadow of loss was a force beyond their control. As Marcus tucked Layla into bed that night, he couldn't shake the feeling that the story wasn't truly over. Perhaps some spirits linger longer than others, waiting, watching, never truly gone. And maybe, just maybe, they were waiting for someone to listen.